Available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you kind of like that little deep dive into a player who I think should be targeted or avoided. A lot of diverse opinions. Continue letting me know your opinions on each of these players as we go through them. But coming next, we have a very interesting tight end who I can't make heads or tails of because I want to like him and I think he's going to be projected to be one of those sneaky under-the-radar guys who finds his way into the top 10 in terms of fantasy tight end rankings. But he's also a guy who I just don't like, at least in the field, if that makes any sense. I don't like necessarily his overall playing style, but that being said, he does project at the very least to be one of those guys who gets a good stat line in PPR or standard leagues, even maybe in dynasty leagues, if you like to continue following his story arc. And that is the draft or pass segment of Jake Ferguson. And the reason why I can't necessarily make heads or tails about Jake Ferguson is because he is in a very advantageous position for a tight end, but I just don't think his profile really fits what the Dallas Cowboys might need him to do this year. So let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys because that will give us a lot of insight into what Jake Ferguson could mean. The Dallas Cowboys obviously are a team reliant on CeeDee Lamb. It's shown his extension. It's showing in perhaps how he matters even more over their quote-unquote franchise quarterback Dak Prescott, who hasn't even received any offer for his extension. So it just goes to show how many questions there are in terms of the talent surrounding Dak Prescott or whoever the Cowboys quarterback in the future may be, in terms of how to share the targets. Because CeeDee Lamb obviously is one. But there is really no 1A, even though Jake Ferguson is kind of the next guy in line. And the reason why I'm not confident in calling him 1A is because obviously no one's really touching Lamb, and Jake Ferguson is a tight end. With that being said, I can make the case for him as a guy who in both standard and PPR leagues might be coveted because of the targets he gets and where he gets them. 23 red zone looks last year for Jake Ferguson. He projected this year, ESPN projections, 90 to 100 targets, projection of 70 catches and 700 yards. And that's what you want of a tight end. Furthermore, only 6 tight ends caught more TDs than Jake Ferguson last year. But here's the thing. You can love a tight end for getting a lot of red zone looks. But when you hear me talk, or any other pundit for that matter, talk about tight ends in a fantasy landscape, we talk about guys who are projecting to either be a breakout star or be in the conversation to be in that top tier of Laporta's, Kelsey's, Andrews, and Kittles. I want an all-around player. You know what I mean? Jake Ferguson, to me, just does not project that right now. He's a fantastic red zone threat. But at this point, the question is that all he can be? And I want to do something interesting here. I actually want to compare him to the guy who he replaced. Dalton Schultz, obviously, for some reason, not good enough for Dallas, goes to Houston last year. Ferguson actually did beat him in terms of yards. He had 761 yards last season. Dalton Schultz had 635 yards and 5 touchdowns. Comparing the offenses that Houston and Dallas had, where Jake Ferguson meant more, I would have taken Dalton Schultz's season over Jake Ferguson's, because if you are the Cowboys and you're consistently getting to the red zone, you want more out of your tight end if he's known as a red zone threat. So what I'm saying is, how can a guy who you replaced, even though you outproduced him, in a team with much better talent around it, produce as many touchdowns as you and just less yardage than you? That's my thing. I want to see Jake Ferguson adapt the role of understanding that he might be the second best quote-unquote receiving option in that Dallas offense. His floor right now, in my humble opinion, is 10 PPR points per game. If he, for some reason, gets any lower than that, then I won't be as high on him. So, my final verdict on him is draft, but with a question mark. Because a lot of you out there might like tight ends still in terms of touchdowns. Because that's what you think. If you can get at least 1 or 2 touchdowns out of your tight end any given week, then you might be saying, okay, I feel good about that. But tight ends have set the bar so high. They become some of the most versatile weapons for QBs everywhere. If you look at Travis Kelce, like he has become almost like a wide receiver in so many regards because his abilities to get open, his abilities to work in any area of the field. If you look at Sam Laporta as well, he's a guy who really works so well in that Detroit Lions system. And he also is in one of those kind of crowded wide receiver rooms where they have to distribute the wealth, and he put up fascinatingly good numbers last year as a rookie. So, you catch my drift. Jake Ferguson is in a tight end market where people are beginning to get out of the mindset of, okay, tight end, yeah, I'll kind of gloss over, pick a guy who I think could be good. Because guys are good now. And so, Jake Ferguson, he's not, quote unquote, flashy enough. And I don't want to use that term because it seems kind of cliche to call a tight end flashy. But that's what people are starting to think of right now. Jake Ferguson seems like a tight end a little bit behind the times. Now, in terms of how the Cowboys offense projects, maybe, with the addition of Kellen Moore, a couple more opportunities in the short to intermediate areas of the field might open up for Jake Ferguson. I think if you look at the profile Kellen Moore brings, he has worked with a lot of guys like Dak, and the thing that he does best with them is getting them to hit every level of the field. And I think that will really help Dak and will ultimately help this offense. And if so, it will help a guy like Jake Ferguson get out of this stagnant mode where you only use him in red zone situations. I think that was the problem last year with this offense. I think, that Jake Ferguson, the reason why he had so many red zone opportunities because a lot of people weren't catching up to him. But this year, it's different. He's not a surprise anymore. So there's going to have to be more versatile ways to get him open. It's going to be important to get him open because he might just be one of 2 reads that Dak is especially looking at down the field. Not to discount any other wide receiver or skill position player for the Dallas Cowboys, but those are the 2 guys that I'm really invested in on the Dallas Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson as receiving options. And this offense is highly dependent on Dak Prescott getting them that level. He has that connection with CeeDee Lamb. It's already a solid connection, and it could make Dak a lot of money if he continues with that. So maybe that rapport will play over into the season a little bit more. But when Dak is forced to look at more options, Jake Ferguson is going to be the next one. And the question is going to be, well, where is it going to come? Is it going to come in the red zone where, yes, touchdowns are nice, but it's not what you want. You want more volume in terms of your tight end. Or is Kellen Moore going to figure out a way to ultimately work Jake Ferguson into this lineup? So those questions are going to have to be answered because when I think about the Cowboys, and not just this year, but their future as well. Let's put Jake Ferguson in a dynasty setting. Jake Ferguson in a dynasty setting, actually makes a little more sense. For the long-term future of this franchise, I think that Jake Ferguson is going to be a guy. Yes, they're going to have to invest a lot of money in a lot of different places. Micah Parsons' contract extension is coming up. They're going to invest a lot in the O-line. They want to keep that intact as well. But Jake Ferguson's going to be a guy who they might have to tie down, because who knows the future of this skill position core, especially at wide receiver. So, Jake Ferguson, let's look at him as a long-term project for the Dallas Cowboys. If you're in a dynasty league right now, I would be saying you might want to think more archaically about the tight end position, because Jake Ferguson is someone who is likely to progress as years go on. And even though in standard and PPR leagues it might stand for something that the volume he gets in the red zone carries over, but in future years, if Kellen Moore is effective in this offense, then we could see Jake Ferguson becoming a better all-around tight end. So if you're in a dynasty league, then I would definitely take that question mark away from draft, because he is someone who, if you're playing in a dynasty league, you can start to think more along the lines of, okay, maybe I can start to think about how these players progress, because it's all about progression here with a guy like Jake Ferguson. We're not talking about a Sam Laporta or a Travis Kelce. We're talking about a guy who has room to grow, and we're talking about a guy who right now is a kind of a fantasy enigma. So my final diagnosis of Jake Ferguson is that he's going to be a solid tight end. But I just want to see his game become diverse enough where he's solid in every aspect of the game. He understands his value to his offense, and most importantly, for the long-term future, he's someone who the Cowboys can rely upon, because right now the Cowboys could be in limbo in terms about their whole contract situation. So look for Jake Ferguson to progress maybe in a dynasty league. I'm all for him in a dynasty league, but right now, the reason why I'm putting an asterisk next to him is because of that kind of barrier between being a red zone tight end and being a quote-unquote revolutionary one. That will just about do it for this segment. Let me know what you think about him in the comments. Coming next week, to conclude our show with a running back, a guy who I'm still waiting to see if he can become a breakout star at the running back position and really kind of reset the market yet again. We're going to have to see who it is after this short break.